So we have made it to the final week of the regular season for the Packers. The season's gone by somewhat quickly. And now, in just a little bit over a week, it will be playoff time. The Packers will be playing in the wild card round. We're still just waiting to see, is it the 7th seed? Will they be the 7th seed, stay where they are right now? Or will they potentially jump to the 6th seed if the Commanders lose to the Cowboys and the Packers are able to beat the Bears this Sunday? But it's pretty crazy. We're already at this point of the season. And hopefully the Packers can go on a run come playoff time. But looking at this Packers team right now, they're coming off a loss to the Minnesota Vikings, only losing by 2. It got very close late. It wasn't very close for a majority of the game. And it feels like, playing Chicago, that this is a game the Packers really do need to come in and take care of business and build that confidence heading into the playoffs. Because if they were to lose to the 4-12 Bears in their final week of the season, right before heading to the wild card round, I don't know if that's great for your mentality as a team to lose to a bottom tier team in the Chicago Bears who have not been good this season. So hopefully the Packers can take care of business. And I think looking at the past game, there were just so many mistakes and so many things early on, especially, that held the Packers back. A lot of penalties, drops, some misses in the when it comes to pass blocking, Jordan Love being inaccurate in some instances, a few other things as well. And so even in light of all that, the Packers still almost won that game. And it feels to me like when Jordan Love is playing football when he's down, he enters this other level where it's almost like he does play at a top tier level. I saw a stat the other day. I don't have it right now on my phone. I need to find the exact one, but he's second or third in passer rating when trailing or tied this season. And so when the Packers are down, Jordan Love really takes his game to another level. And part of me wonders if it's just him potentially, playing more free, knowing that he has to come in and make things happen. And so he sort of plays with a little bit more aggression and is willing to take chances and things work out a lot. And I think early on in games, in the Vikings game, he was just a little bit off early on. He even brought it up in his press conference in the past day or so. And I think that he can just be a little hesitant at times early on in games, especially against some of these, top tier defenses. And it's almost like you want Jordan Love going out there from the start, pretending he's down 2 scores, because I do think it's some like a mindset or a mentality where he knows he has to make things happen. And when he's playing like that, I feel like he loses all fear because, when you start off in the game, he knows he's not supposed to make bad decisions. He, can't force the ball into, bad spots. And not that he loses that when he starts to, play in the second halves, but I feel like he just plays more free because he has less to lose in the second half because he has no option but to come in and, bring the Packers back like he did against the Vikings. And that's what happened. He was just sort of balling out the whole, the final couple drives in the fourth quarter. And so hopefully we see that from the start against the Bears. And looking back to the first time the Packers played the Bears, that was a game that the Packers barely got away with a win. Carl Brooks blocks the field goal as time expires. The Bears lose that 20-19. That could have easily been a Bears victory. And looking back to that game, the Packers had a really, really bad day defensively. For a majority of the season, the Packers' run defense has been some of the best in the NFL. And in that one, the Bears ran the ball 34 times for 179 yards on the Packers' defense. And in that game, the Bears went 9 for 16 on third downs, 3 for 3 on fourth downs. They won the time of possession 36 minutes to the Packers at around 23 minutes. So it was just a really bad day overall for the Packers. And I think, when we look at the Packers' defense so far this year, it was not a great performance against Minnesota. And I think we've seen consistently against some of the best offenses in the NFL. They don't play at quite the same level we've seen in all the other games. Because overall, this has been a very good defense. 6th best scoring defense, 8th in yards allowed, 9th in yards per play allowed. But last week against the Vikings, they held up well in the running game. But Sam Darnold had his best career day. The Vikings have so many really great weapons, and the Packers just couldn't do enough to slow them down. I don't think part of it had to do with Javon Bullard. He had to go in at safety, wasn't expecting to play there. He was just coming off his ankle injury. I think there were a few other things going on there. But in this game, looking at the Bears offense, it has been one of the worst in the NFL so far this season. 29th scoring offense, 32nd in yards per game, 32nd in yards per play. And so going into the year, I know that the Bears thought that they had a great situation around Caleb Williams. The talk was Caleb is going into one of the best possible spots of a rookie that maybe has ever been in the NFL. And I honestly thought that he was going into a very good spot with the receivers there. It looked like they made some other changes that could bode well for Caleb Williams, but that has not been the case. If you look at his overall statistics, just touchdown interception ratio, it doesn't look too bad. 19 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. And outside of last game, when he did throw an interception, he had 9 straight games without an interception. But I don't think those stats tell the whole story. There are a lot of other statistics here I want to share that sort of shows the struggles Caleb Williams has had this year. He's been one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks this season. And I have some stats here to share from Fantasy Points Data, their website. So he has a 5th highest off-target throw percentage in the NFL. He is 34th in catchable target percentage. So there are 33 quarterbacks who had a higher percentage of catchable targets than Caleb Williams. And he's 24th in accuracy percentage. He also has the longest time to throw in the NFL per Next Gen Stats. So Caleb Williams has been very inaccurate. He hasn't thrown a lot of interceptions, but still he has missed on more throws than most quarterbacks in the NFL. And that has led to them being the 29th ranked scoring offense. Last year with Justin Fields, they were 18th, so they jumped 11 spots backwards in Caleb Williams' first year as the quarterback in Chicago. And I do know that the Bears offensive line has struggled a lot. He has faced the 5th highest pressure percentage per Next Gen Stats. But I do think Caleb Williams does have a lot to do with that. He holds the ball way too long, as I already said. He is, where's that stat? 31st in time to pressure in the NFL. So it looks like, teams aren't getting there in a hurry consistently. It's sort of him holding onto the ball. That's sort of a lot of the problems I think there with Caleb Williams in Chicago. And sometimes he tries to escape the pressures, the sacks. It works sometimes, but I feel like he holds the ball too long. That's not to say that it's all his fault, but I think the offensive line deserves blame, as well as Caleb Williams himself. And so I think for the Bears and Caleb Williams, they're going to be hoping that they can get a guy like Ben Johnson in there to call plays next season. I'm just not so sure how it's going to go with Williams in the future. Maybe he takes some steps forward, but it wasn't great for his first season. And so heading into this game, it's going to be a much easier task for the Packers defense than last week against one of the best offenses in the NFL. And I think the Packers defense, this has to be a game where they come in and really play a top-tier game defensively just to sort of give themselves confidence heading into playoff time, because the Packers will be facing some really good offenses, much better than the Chicago Bears. And then rushing the ball, the Bears have not been good either. 25th in rush yards per game, 26th in rush yards per play. And so this Packers defense, I think in year one under Jeff Hafley, they've played really well. If I would have told you when Jeff Hafley got hired that the Packers would be the 6th best scoring defense, 8th in yards allowed, and 9th in yards per play allowed, I think I'd say, okay, that's a very, very solid defense, a top 10 defense. And that's what it's been so far this year. As I said, the defense has struggled more against top-tier offenses, which I think at times is to be expected when you're playing better talent, better offenses. But that's something heading to the playoff time that you sort of hope they can bring their A game against some of these better offenses. And looking at the Packers secondary against the Vikings, it was a pretty bad day. 23rd in EPA per pass versus the Vikings last week. Overall in the season, I do think the secondary for the most part has been pretty good. 4th in EPA per pass allowed. And so they've done a good job overall. They are 17th in pass yards allowed, but I do think lots of times, teams are somewhat pass heavy against the Packers. When you look at the way the Packers rushing defense is played, teams really haven't found much success against the Packers rushing the ball. The Packers are 6th in rush yards allowed per game, 5th in rush yards allowed per play. The Packers pass rush, they did get some pressure on Sam Darnold, but he was able to sort of maneuver around the pocket, escape some of those pressures. They weren't able to turn those pressures into sacks, and so that sort of led to the struggles last week. And so I think in this game, this should be a game the Packers should take care of business. I don't think we're going to see the type of rushing numbers we saw from the Bears last time. Part of it was Caleb Williams himself breaking away. I assume that the Packers will sort of have an eye on that more so in this game, because in that game, Caleb Williams did have 9 carries for 70 yards in that one, so he, was a big part of that one where the Packers almost lost to the Bears. But I do think it should be different in this one. I think the Packers defense will bounce back just after a tough performance this past game. Now moving to the other side of the ball. This past week, it wasn't a great performance offensively from the Packers. They definitely boosted their stats in the end there. And I don't think you can sort of just completely negate what they were able to do in the fourth quarter. They did almost get themselves back into this game, and it's pretty crazy to think that if the defense would have gotten one more stop, the Packers, I think they could have driven down the field in a minute or two, kicked a field goal, and won that game. And that would have been quite the way to sort of end things there against the Vikings. And in each game against the Vikings, the Packers offense did start slow, got things going too little, too late. But in light of all that, this still is a top 10 offense, one of the better passing attacks in the league, 8th in points per game, 7th in yards per game, 9th in EPA per play. And Jordan Love this season, 25 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. And so I think the concern for me with this Packers offense is their struggles against some of these better teams. And we've consistently seen it. Majority of these games against some of the best teams in the league, they have not been able to win. They've gotten off to really slow starts, and that's something that you would like to see sort of change against the Vikings. But unfortunately, that just really wasn't the case, and I talked about it in a video early this week. I think there are a lot of problems. I think that at times Jordan Love was inaccurate. There were a few thirds downs where the pass rush just sort of got to Jordan Love pretty quickly. He didn't really have enough time to make a good decision. Rasheed Walker got beat a few times. Zach Tom got beat there a couple times. The Packers didn't pick up the blitz. And so I think that sort of all led to some struggles in the first half. The Vikings were playing a lot of man, which Matt LaFleur brought up. And I sort of wonder if, maybe sort of just threw off the Packers' timing a little bit because the Vikings were playing pretty physical. The Packers, I think, for the most part, were still getting open at a pretty high rate. I shared the stat from yesterday that in this past week, the Packers had 3 of the top 4 receivers when it came to route win rate per fantasy points. So overall, they were still getting open at a very high rate, around 30 or so percent, a few different guys. So I think it wasn't just the Packers receivers not getting open. That definitely was the case from time to time. And when you look at some of those stats, to be second, third, fourth, your numbers are around 30% when it comes to winning the routes. So even if you get shut down 2 of 3 routes, you're still one of the better receivers when it comes to getting open. And so there were a lot of different things in this game that held the Packers back. Some drops as well, which is a huge problem. If we look at the Packers, they have the 4th highest drop rate in the NFL, drop percentage at 6.8%. That is a big problem for this Packers offense. And lots of these stats are from fantasy points, as I said earlier. And so I do think that against this Bears defense, they've been, when it comes to scoring, they're 12th best scoring offense in the league. When it comes to yards, not as great, 25th in yards, 30th in yards per play. They're just a really shut down defense in the red zone, which is why their yards are so high, but their points are still somewhat reasonable. They are the 3rd best red zone defense in the NFL, and their strength is, I would say, if you had to pick one, is their passing defense. They're 12th in EPA per pass, 18th in pass yards per game. And their rushing defense is pretty bad. 27th in rush yards per game allowed, 26th in rush yards per play allowed. So I think we're going to see the Packers offense get off to a faster start in this one. You just assume that this offense does sort of want to have a bounce back game, especially heading into the playoffs. You don't want to go in struggling against the Bears. I don't know how much confidence that would really give you before you have to go play a team potentially like the Philadelphia Eagles. And I want to go a little bit deeper into Jordan Love and sort of what's happened so far this season for him. He's been really good, I think, so far this year. There has been, a streak of games where he's gone 6 straight games without throwing an interception. That is awesome because for the first 8 or 9 games, he was throwing a pick pretty much every single game. And so he has been better at not turning the ball over. But still, all in all in the season, he hasn't been the most accurate. If you look at accuracy percentage from fantasy points, he's 31st in the NFL in accuracy percentage, which is basically just like highly accurate balls, hitting a receiver in stride, things like that. And that is worse than last year. He was 12th in 2023 in accuracy percentage at 52.3%. So that's dropped about 7%. He's dropped about almost 20 spots there when you compare him to the rest of the guys in the NFL. He's also 19th in catchable throw percentage. He is 14th in off-target throw percentage. And even with him playing really good the past 6 games, he is 24th from fantasy points data in turnover-worthy play rate. And so he hasn't been the most accurate quarterback so far this season. That's not to say that he hasn't been good. I still think he's been a top 10 quarterback so far this year. Just because when you look at his talent, his skill, he still puts up big numbers. I think he's one of the more talented players physically. He is one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL at escaping sacks. He's one of the least sacked quarterbacks among guys with at least 12 starts. He's tied with Josh Allen for only 14 sacks. And you compare it to how much the offensive line is getting pressure. They're allowing a pressure percentage of 13th in the NFL. And so he is evading a lot of pressure back there in the pocket. He's very, very good at that. But I would still say his weakness is at times not being the most accurate guy. We saw it a few times in that game. This past game, he brought it up in his one of his press conferences, later or in this past week. But I still think Jordan Love is a very, very good quarterback. That's just sort of one area where I do think he still has room to grow. And at the end of the day, for quarterbacks, you can have a guy who's not the most accurate still have a ton of success. With Aaron Rodgers, he was always one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. And you look at some of these other quarterbacks, like Josh Allen, for example, one stat when I was looking at this, he's 31st in catchable throw percentage. So it's not the end-all, be-all, but it's just sort of something to take into account. And I still think, as I said, this Packers offense is a top 10 unit. And because they have so many weapons who can get open, Jordan Love with his strong arm, with his, natural abilities, the Packers are able to put up a ton of points. And I think that in this game coming in against Chicago, I do think we'll see this team put up, 25 to 30 points as they have for a majority of the season. And hopefully when the Packers face, some other defenses, they're able to get off to faster starts in some of these games. And as I said, I think there's just a lot of issues from the Vikings game. It wasn't just one thing. And so my score prediction for this game against the 4-12 Bears is going to be Packers 30, Bears 20. That's my score prediction. I think the Packers win by 7 to 10 points. I do think the Bears will come to play because they probably love nothing more than to beat the Packers to end off the season. But I do think that this is a game the Packers will win. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.